The fluorescent lights hummed in the empty hallway as Lucas Reed stood frozen, his hand still gripping the cold metal of the door handle. Behind him, a voice cut through the silence, calm, measured, almost fragile. "Are you still upset with me?" He didn't turn around, couldn't, because the woman asking wasn't just his CEO. She was Claire Bennett, sister of the man whose death Lucas had carried like a stone in his chest for 4 years. The man he believed he'd killed with a single decision. The guilt had become his shadow, following him through every boardroom, every late night with his daughter, every moment he'd spent carefully avoiding the one person who had every right to hate him. Now, on this quiet Friday evening, there was nowhere left to run. If you want to know how a single choice can haunt a man for years, how guilt can become a prison, and how the truth can finally set you free, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The emergency exit door felt heavy in Lucas's grip, much heavier than it should have been. He'd been heading toward the stairwell, toward escape, toward the same routine he'd perfected over the past 8 months. Leave before she notices, avoid the executive floor, keep your head down, get home to Maya. But Claire's voice had stopped him cold. "Are you still upset with me?" The question hung in the air between them, ridiculous in its gentleness, devastating in its assumption. Upset with her? Lucas wanted to laugh, wanted to scream, wanted to dissolve into the polished floor tiles and disappear forever. She thought he was angry. She thought his careful avoidance, his strategic absences from leadership meetings, his sudden need to work remotely whenever possible, she thought it was resentment. She had no idea it was grief, shame, the kind of guilt that carved out your insides and left you walking around like a hollow version of yourself. Lucas finally turned, his messenger bag sliding down his shoulder. Claire stood 15 feet away, still in her work clothes, a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look older than 30, more tired than anyone should look on a Friday evening. The overhead lights cast shadows under her eyes. She looked exactly like Evan had those last few weeks. Exhausted, determined, running on fumes and refusing to stop. "I'm not upset with you," Lucas said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "I've never been upset with you." "Then why won't you look at me during executive meetings? Why do you leave rooms when I enter them? Why did you request to be removed from every project I oversee directly?" Each question landed like a physical blow. Lucas shifted his weight, gripping the door handle tighter. "Claire, I don't think this is the time. It's been 8 months, Lucas." Her voice cracked slightly, just enough to betray the careful composure. 8 months since I became CEO, and you've treated me like I'm radioactive. I need to know why. I need to understand what I did to make you hate me this much." "I don't hate you." The words came out forcefully, too forcefully, echoing in the empty corridor. Lucas took a breath, steadied himself. "I could never hate you." "Then what is it?" "Because I've run through every possibility. Did I overlook you for a promotion? Did I make a decision that hurt your team? Did I—" She paused, her professional mask slipping further. "Did I remind you too much of him?" There it was. The name neither of them had spoken. The ghost that haunted every interaction, every carefully avoided glance, every reason Lucas had for keeping his distance. Evan. Lucas felt something crack inside his chest, something he'd been holding together with willpower and avoidance and the desperate need to keep functioning for his daughter's sake. His hand fell away from the door handle. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. "You've never done anything wrong, Claire. That's not why I've been avoiding you." "Then why?" The hallway suddenly felt too small, too bright, too exposed. Lucas looked past Claire toward the glass-walled conference rooms, the darkened cubicles, the city lights visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end. His company ID badge felt heavy against his chest. "Because every time I see you, I remember that I'm the reason your brother is dead." The words fell between them like broken glass. Claire's expression didn't change immediately. She stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her, processing what he'd said with the same careful precision she brought to every board meeting, every strategic decision, every moment of her carefully controlled professional life. Then something shifted in her eyes. Not anger, but something closer to recognition, or maybe resignation. "Conference room C," she said softly. "Please, We need to talk about this properly, and I can't do it in a hallway." Lucas wanted to refuse, wanted to grab that exit door and disappear into the stairwell, into his car, into the safety of his small apartment where Maya would be waiting with her babysitter, where he could lose himself in bedtime stories and pretend this conversation never happened. But he'd been running for 4 years. 8 months from Claire specifically, but 4 years from the truth of what happened that night. Maybe it was time to stop. He followed her down the corridor, past the empty desks and silent printers, past the motivational posters about innovation and teamwork that suddenly felt grotesque in their cheerfulness. Conference Room C sat at the corner of the building, glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city as evening settled into night. Claire closed the door behind them, not bothering with the lights. The ambient glow from the city was enough, painting everything in shades of blue and gray. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chairs around the long conference table. Lucas remained standing, his bag still over his shoulder, like he might need to run at any moment. "Claire, I don't know if this is a good idea." 4 years, Lucas." She turned to face him fully, and in the dim light he could see tears gathering in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. "You've been carrying this for 4 years?" "Since the night it happened." The confession came easier than expected, like lancing a wound that had been festering too long. "Since the hospital, since I saw you and your parents in that waiting room, since I realized that my decision, my approval of that schedule, my—" "Stop." Claire's voice was sharp now, cutting through his spiral. "Just stop. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything you've been holding on to. Tell me what you think you did." Lucas set his bag down on the table, finally accepting that he wasn't leaving. Not yet. He moved to the window, staring out at the city lights rather than facing Claire directly. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. "It was 4 years ago, October. We were 3 weeks from deadline on the Morrison platform launch. You remember that project? It was supposed to be the company's big breakthrough, the product that would establish us as serious players in the enterprise market." "I remember," Claire said quietly. "Evan talked about it constantly. He was so excited." Lucas nodded, his throat tight. "He was brilliant on that project. The best engineer I'd ever worked with. 26 years old and already thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He'd come to me with solutions before I even fully understood the problems." He paused, remembering Evan's enthusiasm, his constant energy, the way he'd volunteer for everything because he genuinely loved the work. "The last 3 weeks got brutal. We were behind schedule, dealing with integration issues we hadn't anticipated. The client was threatening to pull out if we didn't deliver on time. Management was breathing down my neck. I was pulling 16-hour days and I wasn't even doing the technical work." Lucas turned slightly, catching Claire's reflection in the window glass. She stood motionless, listening. "Evan kept volunteering for extra shifts. He'd stay late, come in early. I tried to rotate the overtime fairly, tried to make sure everyone got rest, but he kept insisting. He'd tell me he didn't have a family waiting at home, didn't have kids to pick up from daycare. He could handle it." "That sounds like him," Claire whispered. "I should have said no more often. Should have forced him to take days off. But I was desperate, and he was good, and the deadline was approaching like a freight train." Lucas's reflection blurred as his eyes watered. 3 days before launch, we hit a critical bug. Database corruption that could tank the entire platform. Evan figured out the solution, but it required a complete rebuild of the authentication system. He said he could do it, but it would take 12 to 15 hours of focused work. The overnight shift. The overnight shift, Lucas confirmed, his voice hollow. I approved it. He insisted he was fine, that he'd pulled all-nighters before. I gave him access to the building, told security he'd be working late. I went home to sleep while he stayed to save the project. The memory of that night had sharp edges, even 4 years later. Lucas remembered getting home around 10 p.m., remembered setting his alarm for 6 a.m. to come back and check on progress, remembered sleeping soundly while Evan worked alone in an empty building. I got the call at 4:30 in the morning. Not from Evan, from the hospital. He'd been found unconscious at his desk by the night security guard. Cardiac event, they said. Stress, exhaustion, undiagnosed heart condition triggered by extreme overwork. Lucas's voice cracked, and he stopped, pressing his forehead against the cool glass of the window. I drove to the hospital in my pajamas. I got there before your parents, before you flew in from Boston. I watched them work on him through the window of the ICU, and then I watched them stop. I watched the doctor shake his head. I watched them pull the sheet over his face. Behind him, Claire made a sound, half sob, half sharp intake of breath. When you arrived, you walked right past me in the waiting room. You didn't even see me. You went straight to your parents, and I heard your mother collapse against you, heard her scream, and I stood there knowing it was my fault. I had approved that shift. I had pushed him too hard. I had valued a product launch over a human life. Lucas turned from the window, finally facing Claire directly. She stood with one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, her careful composure completely shattered. I wrote my resignation that night, he continued, effective immediately. I went to the CEO's office the next morning and explained everything, the schedule, the hours, the overtime I'd approved. I told them I was responsible for Evan's death and that I couldn't work there anymore. They didn't accept it, Claire said, her voice muffled behind her hand. No. They said it was a tragedy, that Evan had an undiagnosed condition, that no one could have predicted it. They refused my resignation and told me to take a leave of absence instead. I took 3 weeks, went to the funeral, watched them bury a 26-year-old genius because I had been too weak to say no to overtime. Lucas moved away from the window, pacing along the far side of the conference table. When I came back to work, I wrote new protocols, safety measures, mandatory time-off policies, limits on consecutive overtime shifts. I submitted them to HR, to management, to anyone who would listen. Most of them got ignored. Too expensive, they said. Not practical for deadline-driven work. He laughed bitterly. I stayed because I thought I could change things. Because I thought if I could prevent even one more person from dying at their desk, maybe Evan's death wouldn't be completely meaningless. But then 2 years ago, everything changed. Claire wiped her eyes, waiting. I became a single father. My ex-wife left when Maya was 6 months old. Just walked out one day and never came back. Suddenly I was alone with a baby, trying to be a good dad while carrying this guilt, trying to balance work and parenthood while knowing I had killed someone else's child. Lucas stopped pacing, gripping the back of a conference chair. And then 8 months ago, you became CEO, Evan's sister, the woman whose family I destroyed. I couldn't face you, Claire. Every time I saw you in a meeting, I saw him. I saw the brilliant young man who trusted me, who believed I'd keep him safe, who died because I was too focused on a deadline to protect him. So you avoided me, Claire said, her voice steadier now. I avoided you. I requested transfers. I worked remotely whenever possible. I made sure we never had to be alone together because I was terrified that you'd look at me and finally see what I was. The man who killed your brother. The man who doesn't deserve to lead anyone. Who certainly doesn't deserve to raise a child. Who should have been fired and prosecuted. And stop! Claire's voice cut through his spiral with unexpected force. She moved around the table, closing the distance between them until she stood just a few feet away. Lucas, look at me. He did reluctantly, expecting to see hatred, disgust, the confirmation of every terrible thing he'd believed about himself for 4 years. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like relief. I need you to hear something, Claire said carefully. And I need you to really listen, not just wait for your turn to argue. Can you do that? Lucas nodded, not trusting his voice. I already knew. The words didn't make sense at first. Lucas stared at her confused, waiting for clarification. I already knew everything you just told me, Claire repeated, about the schedule, the overtime, the overnight shift, about your resignation attempt, about the safety protocols you tried to implement. I've known since the day I became CEO. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Lucas's feet. What? One of the first things I did when I took this position was review everything related to Evan's death. Every email, every schedule, every report. I read your resignation letter. I read the proposals you submitted. I read the warnings you sent to senior management about unsustainable workloads. Claire's voice was gentle but firm. I know you tried to protect him, Lucas. I know you tried to change things after he died. Lucas felt like he might be sick. But if you knew, why didn't you fire me? Why didn't you... Fire you? Lucas, I kept you specifically because of what I found in those files. Claire moved closer, her voice urgent. Do you know what else I discovered when I reviewed Evan's final performance reviews? He shook his head, unable to speak. Claire pulled out her phone, scrolling through screens until she found what she was looking for. She turned it toward Lucas, showing him a scanned document, a performance review written in Evan's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his death. Read the section I highlighted, she said. Lucas took the phone with trembling hands, focusing on the yellow-marked paragraph. Lucas Reed is the best manager I've ever had. Most people in leadership positions treat engineers like resources to be optimized. Lines of code per hour, tickets closed per day, problems solved per sprint. Lucas treats us like human beings. He remembers our names, asks about our lives outside work, fights for our time off even when upper management pushes back. He approves my overtime because I volunteer for it, not because he demands it. I've learned more from him about leadership and integrity in 6 months than I learned in 4 years of business school. If I ever move into management, I want to lead the way Lucas does, with compassion, competence, and genuine respect for the people who trust you with their careers. Lucas read it twice, 3 times, the words blurring as tears filled his eyes. His hand shook so badly he had to hand the phone back to Claire before he dropped it. He admired you, Claire said softly. He respected you. And yes, he chose to work that overnight shift. You approved it because he insisted, because the project was critical, because you trusted his judgment. But Evan was an adult, Lucas. He made his own decisions. I should have protected him. You tried. God, Lucas, you tried so hard. I saw the emails you sent to HR 3 months before he died, warning them that the team was burning out. I saw the schedule adjustments you made trying to rotate overtime fairly. I saw the memo you sent to the executive team explaining that the Morrison deadline was unrealistic given available resources. Claire's voice rose slightly, passionate now, almost angry, but not at him. You did everything a good manager should do. You advocated for your team. You pushed back against unrealistic demands. You documented safety concerns. And when management ignored you, when they prioritized profit over people, when they pushed you to push your team harder, you still tried to protect everyone as much as you could. It wasn't enough, Lucas whispered. No, it wasn't, because you were fighting a system designed to extract maximum value from people with minimum concern for their well-being. You were one person trying to hold back a corporate culture that treated employees as disposable. Claire's eyes blazed with conviction. But that doesn't make his death your fault. It makes it a systemic failure, one I've spent 8 months trying to fix. Lucas looked up at her, confused. What do you mean? Claire returned to her phone, pulling up another document, this one official, with the company logo at the top. Do you recognize this? Lucas squinted at the screen, his eyes still blurry with tears. It was a policy document, dated 6 months earlier. The Evan Bennett Memorial Safety Protocol, named after my brother, based entirely on the proposals you submitted 4 years ago. Claire's voice was thick with emotion. Mandatory rest periods, limits on consecutive overtime shifts, required mental health check-ins for high-stress projects, anonymous reporting systems for unsafe working conditions. Everything you fought for and management ignored. I made it policy the moment I had the authority. Lucas stared at the document, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. You did this? We did this, Claire corrected. Your proposals gave me the framework. Your documentation proved the need. Your integrity showed me what real leadership looks like. She paused, wiping her eyes. I didn't keep you in this company out of ignorance, Lucas. I kept you because you were exactly the kind of leader I needed to help me change things, the kind of person Evan believed you were. The conference room felt impossibly small, the air thick with 4 years of unspoken grief, guilt, and misunderstanding. Lucas gripped the edge of the table, his legs suddenly unsteady. I thought you'd hate me, he said, his voice breaking. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd blame me the way I blame myself. I did blame someone, Claire said quietly. I blamed the executives who ignored your warnings. I blamed the corporate culture that treated my brilliant, passionate 26-year-old brother like a disposable resource. I blamed a system that measures success in quarterly earnings while grinding people into dust. Her voice hardened. and I decided to burn that system down and build something better. She moved to stand beside Lucas, both of them looking out at the city lights, the vast sprawl of offices where people worked late into the night, where other talented young professionals pushed themselves too hard, where other managers struggled to protect their teams against impossible demands. When I became CEO, I made a promise to myself and to Evan's memory, Claire said. I would make this company into the kind of place where his death couldn't happen again, where managers like you would have support instead of being overruled, where employees would be valued as humans, not optimized as resources. Is that even possible? Lucas asked, his cynicism born from 4 years of fighting and failing. I don't know. Maybe not perfectly. But I'm trying, and I need people like you, people who understand the cost of failure, who remember what we're trying to prevent, to help me. Lucas turned to look at her fully, seeing not just Evan's sister or his CEO, but a woman carrying her own grief, her own guilt, her own determination to make meaning from loss. Why didn't you tell me you knew? He asked. Why let me avoid you for 8 months? Claire smiled sadly. Because I recognized the look in your eyes, the same guilt I saw in my own mirror every morning. I blame myself too, Lucas. I was in Boston finishing my MBA while Evan worked himself to death. I didn't call enough, didn't visit, didn't notice he was struggling. I thought if I had been paying attention, if I had been a better sister, maybe I could have stopped him. That's not your fault. And it's not yours either, Claire interrupted firmly. But I understand why you believed it was. Grief doesn't follow logic. Guilt doesn't wait for facts. We both spent years punishing ourselves for a death that neither of us caused, but both of us survived. She reached out, tentatively, placing her hand over his where it gripped the table edge. I didn't push you to talk because I knew you needed time. I hoped that eventually, when you were ready, you'd trust me enough to have this conversation. I just didn't expect it to take 8 months. Lucas looked down at her hand on his, warm, steady, real. I didn't expect to be cornered in a hallway on a Friday night. I got tired of waiting and of wondering if you'd ever stop running. Claire squeezed his hand gently. I miss having you in leadership meetings. You have good ideas and the team respects you. More importantly, I need managers who understand what we're trying to build here. A company that actually cares about its people. Even after everything I just told you, even knowing I approved the shift that killed him? Especially knowing that, Claire said firmly. Because you understand the weight of those decisions. You won't make them lightly. You won't treat people as expendable. Lucas closed his eyes, feeling something shift in his chest. Not the weight lifting entirely, but maybe beginning to redistribute, becoming something he could carry without being crushed. I have a daughter now, he said quietly. Maya, she's 4 years old. When I look at her, I think about Evan's parents losing their son. I think about how fragile life is. How quickly everything can change. I'm terrified every day that I'm not good enough, that I'll make another mistake, that I'll... You're a good father, Lucas. Claire's voice was gentle but certain. I've seen you leave meetings early for daycare pickup. I've noticed how you never schedule calls during dinner time. I've heard your team talk about how you actually enforce work-life boundaries now, how you lead by example. Because I learned, Lucas said bitterly. I learned by killing someone. No. Claire turned him to face her, both hands on his shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. You learned by caring enough to change, by refusing to let Evan's death be meaningless, by becoming the kind of leader he believed you already were. Lucas felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling, the armor of guilt and self-punishment he'd worn for 4 years suddenly too heavy to hold up any longer. He sagged against the conference table, Claire's hands the only thing keeping him upright. I'm so sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry I approved that shift. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to... Stop apologizing for being human, Claire said, and her voice cracked too, her own tears falling freely now. Stop apologizing for caring. Stop carrying a burden that was never entirely yours to bear. They stood there in the darkened conference room, two people bound by shared grief, shared guilt, shared determination to honor a life lost too soon. The city lights painted everything in shades of blue, and somewhere in the building below, the night security guard made his rounds, checking doors and marking his log, unaware of the conversation happening 15 floors above. Finally, Claire stepped back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, professional composure beginning to reassemble itself. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Lucas nodded, exhausted but somehow lighter than he'd felt in years. Will you stay? Not just at the company, but in leadership. Will you help me build something better? Will you stop avoiding me and let me know you as a colleague, maybe even as a friend? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Lucas thought about Maya, waiting at home. He thought about Evan, brilliant and gone. He thought about 4 years of running, of hiding, of punishing himself while trying to survive. He thought about the policy bearing Evan's name, about the lives that might be saved by protocols born from tragedy, about the possibility that pain could become purpose. On one condition, he said finally. Claire raised an eyebrow. What's that? You stop blaming yourself too. You stop carrying guilt for being in Boston, for not calling enough, for not somehow preventing something you couldn't have known would happen. Lucas managed a weak smile. If I have to forgive myself, you have to forgive yourself. Deal? Claire laughed, a short, surprised sound that broke the tension. That's harder than it sounds. I know, but if we're going to do this, if we're going to actually change things, we can't do it while hating ourselves. Evan deserves better than that. He does, Claire agreed softly. She extended her hand formally, professionally. So do we have a deal, Mr. Reed? Full participation in leadership? No more avoiding meetings? Actual collaboration on making this company better? Lucas looked at her outstretched hand, thinking about all the handshakes that had come before. The one when he first started at the company, the one when Evan joined his team, the one he never got to give Evan after the successful product launch that came 3 weeks too late. He reached out and clasped Claire's hand firmly. Deal, Ms. Bennett, but I'm picking Maya up at 7, so if you schedule breakfast meetings, I'm calling in. I'll make a note of it. Claire's smile was genuine now, warm despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. And maybe sometime, when you're ready, you could introduce me to her. I'd like to meet the little girl who reminds you why boundaries matter. Lucas felt his throat tighten again, but this time it was different. Not grief or guilt, but something almost like hope. I'd like that, he said. She'd like you. She's fascinated by powerful women, as she calls them. Last week she told me she wants to be CEO when she grows up. Smart kid. She gets that from her father. They gathered their things in comfortable silence. Lucas retrieving his messenger bag, Claire checking her phone for messages she'd ignored during their conversation. The city outside continued its Friday night rhythm, indifferent to the reconciliation happening in Conference Room C. At the door, Lucas paused. Claire? Thank you. For not giving up on me, for understanding why I needed to run, even if it took me too long to stop. Thank you for finally trusting me enough to tell me the truth, Claire replied. And for being brave enough to face something you've been terrified of for 4 years. They walked together to the elevator, no longer avoiding each other's presence, no longer carrying the weight of unspoken accusations and assumed blame. The building was quiet around them, most employees long since gone home to their families, their lives, their weekend plans. As the elevator descended, Lucas caught their reflection in the polished metal doors. 2 tired people, marked by loss, determined despite everything to move forward. When the doors opened in the parking garage, they headed toward their cars together. Claire's Mercedes was parked 3 spaces from Lucas's sensible Honda Civic with the car seat visible in the back. See you Monday? Claire asked, unlocking her car. Monday, Lucas confirmed. I'll actually attend the leadership meeting this time. Good. We're discussing the quarterly safety audit results. I'll need your input. Lucas smiled. I'll prepare notes over the weekend, between playground trips and cartoon marathons. That sounds perfect, Claire said, and meant it. They drove out of the garage in opposite directions, Claire toward her downtown condo, Lucas toward the modest apartment complex in the suburbs where Maya waited with Mrs. Chen from upstairs, probably already in pajamas, definitely demanding one more story before bed. As Lucas merged onto the highway, his phone rang through the car speakers. Maya's excited voice filled the vehicle. Daddy, when are you coming home? Mrs. Chen says I can stay up late because it's Friday. I'm on my way, sweetheart. Be there in 20 minutes. We made cookies. Well, Mrs. Chen made cookies and I supervised. That's what bosses do, right? They supervise? Lucas laughed, genuine and full, the first real laugh he could remember in months. That's exactly what bosses do. Save me 3 cookies, okay? Only 3? Daddy, there's like a million. Okay, save me 4, but you need to brush your teeth extra good tonight. Deal. Drive safe. I love you. I love you too, Maya Bean. See you soon. The call ended, and Lucas drove through the city lights, carrying less weight than he had that morning. The guilt wasn't gone. He suspected it never would be entirely. But it was different now, transformed from a crushing burden into something else. A reminder, a motivation, a reason to do better, be better, protect others better. Evan was still gone. That truth remained, sharp and painful. But maybe, just maybe, his death didn't have to define Lucas forever. Maybe it could be part of a larger story, one about learning, changing, fighting for something better. Maybe forgiveness, even self-forgiveness, was possible. Lucas pulled into his apartment complex, parking in his assigned spot. The windows of his unit glowed warm on the 3rd floor. Maya's silhouette appeared at the window, waving frantically when she spotted his car. He waved back, grabbed his bag, and headed inside. Monday would come. Leadership meetings, safety protocols, the ongoing work of building something better from the ashes of tragedy. But tonight was for cookies and bedtime stories, for being present with the little girl who needed him, for allowing himself to be happy despite everything. For the first time in 4 years, Lucas felt like he might deserve it. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Lucas dropped Maya off at preschool 20 minutes early, watching through the classroom window as she immediately commandeered the block corner, organizing her classmates into what appeared to be a construction company. Her teacher, Miss Rodriguez, caught his eye and smiled, giving him a thumbs up. "She's going to run the world someday," Miss Rodriguez said as Lucas signed the attendance sheet. "That's what I'm afraid of," Lucas replied, but he was smiling as he said it. The drive to the office felt different. Lucas didn't take the long route to avoid arriving too early, didn't park on the far side of the garage to minimize elevator encounters, didn't time his entry to miss the executive floor morning rush. He parked in his assigned spot, took the main elevator, and arrived at his desk by 8:15 with a coffee from the lobby cafe and a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. His team was already gathering for their morning stand-up. Priya, his lead developer, raised an eyebrow when she saw him. "Boss man's here early. Should we be worried?" "Just turning over a new leaf," Lucas said, setting down his coffee. "How was everyone's weekend?" The stand-up ran smoothly, efficiently. Lucas listened to status updates, helped troubleshoot a database issue, approved a timeline extension for testing. Normal work. Good work. The kind of management he'd been doing competently for years, even while carrying his guilt like a second skeleton. At 9:30, his calendar reminder chimed. Leadership meeting in conference room B. Lucas felt his stomach clench reflexively. The old instinct to find an excuse, to send his notes by email, to avoid. No. He'd made a promise. He grabbed his laptop and headed to the executive floor. Conference room B was already half full when he arrived. Department heads clustered around the table, reviewing agendas on tablets, discussing weekend plans. Lucas slid into his usual seat, middle of the table, left side, and opened his laptop. "Lucas, good to see you." Marcus Chen, the CFO, nodded from across the table. "Been a while since you joined us in person." "Remote work has its limits," Lucas said casually. "Figured it was time to show my face again." "Well, we've missed your perspective. Claire's been asking for your input on the new protocols, but it's easier to collaborate face-to-face." At 9:45, Claire entered with her assistant, carrying a tablet and looking every inch the CEO in a navy suit that matched the intensity in her eyes. She scanned the room, her gaze landing briefly on Lucas with something that might have been relief or approval, then moved to the head of the table. "Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. First item is the quarterly safety audit results." For the next hour, Lucas participated fully for the first time in 8 months. He offered feedback on implementation challenges, suggested modifications to reporting procedures, answered questions about how the protocols were working at the team level. When Claire presented data showing a 30% reduction in overtime hours and a significant increase in employee satisfaction scores, she caught his eye deliberately. These numbers reflect what happens when we prioritize people over short-term productivity. Lucas, your team has been particularly successful in adopting the new boundaries. What's your secret? Lucas felt 15 pairs of eyes turn toward him. The old panic flickered. They're watching, they're judging, they know what you did. But he pushed through it. It's not a secret, it's just respect. When someone on my team says they need to leave at 5 for family obligations, I don't question it. When they look exhausted, I tell them to take a day off, not to power through. When deadlines conflict with human limitations, I push back on the deadline. And your team's productivity hasn't suffered, Claire noted, highlighting a chart. In fact, you've had the highest quality ratings and the lowest bug count this quarter. Turns out people do better work when they're not running on fumes and resentment, Lucas said dryly. A few people chuckled. Marcus nodded approvingly. One of the newer directors, Sarah from marketing, leaned forward. How do you handle client pressure? We get pushback all the time about why we can't just have people work weekends to meet tighter deadlines. Lucas considered his answer carefully. I tell clients the truth, that sustainable pace produces better results than burnout sprints, that we build quality products by respecting the people who build them. Some clients appreciate that. The ones who don't, he glanced at Claire, maybe aren't the right fit for who we're trying to be as a company. Agreed, Claire said firmly. We've actually turned down 3 contracts this quarter because clients refuse to accept our timeline requirements. But the projects we have taken on have been more successful, more profitable, and haven't cost us employees to stress-related health issues. The meeting continued through financial reports, product roadmaps, and hiring strategies. Lucas contributed where he had expertise, listened when others knew better, and felt something unfamiliar settling into his chest, the sense that he belonged here, that his perspective mattered, that he was part of building something worthwhile. When the meeting ended at 11, people filtered out in clusters, discussing lunch plans and afternoon meetings. Lucas was packing his laptop when Claire approached. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "Thank you for needing me here," he replied. "I meant what I said about your team's results. You're proof the system works." She paused. "Actually, I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to do something for me." "What kind of something?" "We're hosting a company-wide town hall next month to discuss the Evan Bennett Memorial Safety Protocol and its impact. I'd like you to speak about implementing it at the team level, share what's worked, what hasn't, why it matters." Lucas felt the old fear spike. "Claire, I don't know if I'm the right person to speak about a protocol named after someone You're exactly the right person," Claire interrupted gently, "because you understand the stakes. You've lived with the consequences of what happens when we get it wrong, and you've demonstrated that getting it right doesn't require sacrificing excellence." "That's a lot of pressure." "I know. Think about it. You don't have to decide now." Lucas nodded, already knowing he'd say yes, but needing time to figure out how to stand in front of 300 employees and talk about safety protocols without breaking down about the brilliant young engineer who'd died before they existed. He returned to his desk to find Priya waiting, laptop open, expression concerned. "We have a problem with the Henderson project," she said without preamble. "Client just moved the deadline up 2 weeks. They want the full platform delivered by end of month instead of mid-November." Lucas felt the familiar tension creep into his shoulders. Why the change? Their competitor just launched something similar. They want to beat them to market with our enhanced features. "What do we need to make the timeline?" Priya pulled up the project schedule. "Realistically, everyone working 60-hour weeks for the next month. Maybe some weekend coverage. All hands on deck kind of situation." 2 years ago, Lucas would have approved it without hesitation. 1 year ago, racked with guilt but afraid to seem weak, he might have approved it while hating himself. Now, he looked at the schedule, thought about Evan working through the night alone, thought about Maya asking when Daddy would be home for dinner, thought about the protocol bearing a dead man's name. "No," he said simply. Priya blinked. "No? We're not doing 60-hour weeks. We're not doing weekends. We're going to look at the scope and see what can realistically be delivered in the original timeline versus what gets pushed to a Phase 2 release." "The client won't like that." "Then I'll talk to the client." Lucas was already opening his email. "Schedule a call for this afternoon. I'll explain that we can either deliver a quality product on the original timeline or a rushed product on their new timeline. Their choice. And if they threaten to pull the contract. Lucas looked up at Priya, seeing the uncertainty in her expression. She was 28, talented, ambitious, probably willing to sacrifice her personal life for career advancement because everyone told her that's what success required. Then we let them pull it, he said firmly. Priya, I'm not going to ask you or anyone else on this team to destroy your health and relationships for a client deadline. Not anymore. Not ever. Something shifted in Priya's expression. Surprise, maybe relief. Okay, I'll set up the call. The client call that afternoon went about as well as expected. The Henderson project manager was not happy about Lucas's refusal to compress the timeline through overtime. Every other vendor we've worked with understands that business moves fast, the man said, his voice sharp through the conference room speakers. Sometimes you need to push your team to stay competitive. And every other vendor you've worked with has probably experienced high turnover, quality issues, and employee burnout, Lucas replied calmly. We build sustainable products through sustainable practices. I can deliver an excellent platform by mid-November, or I can deliver a probably functional platform by end of October. Which would you prefer? I'd prefer a vendor who's willing to be flexible. Then you might want to find one, because my flexibility ends where my team's well-being begins. There was a long pause. Then, unexpectedly, a different voice came through the line, older, more measured. This is Robert Henderson, CEO. Lucas, is it? Yes, sir. I appreciate your honesty. Most vendors tell us what we want to hear, then deliver garbage because their people are too exhausted to think straight. Let's stick with your original timeline. My project manager will adjust our internal schedules accordingly. After the call ended, Priya stared at Lucas with something approaching awe. I've never seen anyone do that before, just flat out refuse a client demand. Get used to it, Lucas said. We're not in the business of burning people out. We're in the business of building good software with people who want to keep working here. The afternoon passed in a blur of emails, code reviews, and planning sessions. Lucas left promptly at 5:30, picking Maya up from after-school care and taking her to the park for an hour before dinner. She climbed the jungle gym while he pushed her on the swings, her laughter carrying across the playground. Daddy, watch me! Watch this! He watched. He was always watching now, present in a way he hadn't been when guilt consumed every spare moment of mental energy. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas settled into a new rhythm. He attended leadership meetings, contributed to strategic discussions, and collaborated with Claire on refining safety protocols. He also started saying no more often, to unrealistic timelines, to scope creep, to anything that would require his team to sacrifice their lives for their jobs. It didn't always go smoothly. One client did pull their contract. A project got delayed because Lucas refused to approve mandatory overtime. Some colleagues questioned whether he was being too rigid, too inflexible, too focused on process over results. But his team thrived. Turnover dropped to 0. Quality metrics improved. People started requesting transfers to his department because word spread that Lucas Reed actually meant it when he said work-life balance mattered. 3 weeks after the hallway conversation, Claire stopped by his desk on a Thursday afternoon. Do you have a few minutes? For you? Always. Lucas saved his work and followed her to a smaller conference room, this one without the dramatic city views but with comfortable chairs and natural light. Claire sat down, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I've been thinking about the town hall, about asking you to speak. I've been thinking about it too, Lucas admitted. I want to do it. I'm terrified, but I want to do it. That's not actually why I'm here. Claire twisted her hands together, a gesture he'd never seen from the composed CEO. Lucas, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you'll react. His stomach dropped. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just, when I reviewed Evan's files, when I read everything about his death, I found something else, something I haven't told you. Lucas waited, heart pounding. I found a letter. Evan wrote it 2 days before he died. It was in his desk, sealed in an envelope addressed to me. Security found it when they cleared out his workspace, but it got mixed up with his personal effects. My parents gave it to me 6 months ago when they were going through his things. What did it say? Claire pulled out her phone, opening a photo of a handwritten letter. I'll read you the relevant part. Claire, I know you worry about me working too hard, but I want you to understand something. Lucas isn't pushing me. If anything, he's constantly trying to pull me back, to make me take breaks, to go home at reasonable hours. I volunteer for these projects because I love the work, because I want to prove myself, because I want to build something that matters. Lucas respects that, but he also protects me from my own ambition when he can. If I burn out, it won't be because he drove me too hard. It will be because I drove myself, and he tried to stop me. Lucas felt his throat constrict. He wrote that 2 days before he died, Claire finished quietly. He knew he was pushing himself too hard. He knew Lucas was trying to protect him, and he chose to keep going anyway because he believed the work mattered. That doesn't make it okay. I still approved the overnight shift. No, it doesn't make it okay. Evan died, and nothing makes that okay. Claire's voice was firm but gentle. But it means he understood the risks and chose to take them. It means you're not the villain in this story, Lucas. You're the manager who tried to save someone from themselves and couldn't. Lucas stared at the photo of Evan's handwriting, the familiar slant of his letters, the enthusiastic underlining that characterized everything Evan wrote. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to understand something before the town hall. Claire leaned forward, intense. I'm not asking you to speak about the safety protocol as some kind of penance. I'm asking you because Evan was right about you. You are the kind of leader who protects people from their own ambition, who values humans over productivity, who fights for boundaries even when it's professionally inconvenient. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I need the company to hear from someone who understands why these policies exist on a personal level. Not from me standing up there as the CEO, whose brother died. That's tragedy, as abstraction. But from you, a working manager who implements these policies every single day because you know what happens when we don't. You want me to tell them about Evan. I want you to tell them why you believe boundaries matter. If that includes Evan's story, that's up to you. But I won't ask you to mine your grief for corporate inspiration. This is your choice. Lucas looked at the letter again, at Evan's words defending him from blame Evan somehow knew Lucas would carry. Can I keep this? The photo, I mean? I'll send it to you. Claire's expression softened. He admired you, Lucas. Even at the end, even when he was working himself to exhaustion, he respected what you stood for. That meant something to him. It should mean something to you, too. That evening, after Maya was asleep, Lucas sat at his small kitchen table with a glass of water and the photo of Evan's letter on his phone. He read it over and over, looking for some hidden meaning, some absolution, some proof that he'd done enough. The words stayed the same. Evan had known the risks, had chosen to take them, had respected Lucas's attempts to protect him while ultimately making his own decisions. It didn't erase the guilt entirely. Lucas suspected nothing ever would. But it shifted something, the understanding that he'd been carrying responsibility for choices that weren't entirely his to control. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Take your time with the decision, no pressure. But for what it's worth, I think you're exactly who people need to hear from. Lucas typed back slowly. I'll do it, but I need your help figuring out what to say. We'll work on it together. Thank you, Lucas. He set the phone down and walked to Maya's room, standing in the doorway watching her sleep. She was sprawled across her toddler bed, covers kicked off, one arm hanging over the edge. Her nightlight projected stars across the ceiling. This was why boundaries mattered. Not abstract policy, not corporate responsibility, but this. The ability to be present for the small person who needed him, who deserved a father who wasn't consumed by work or crushed by guilt. Evan had understood that too, in his own way. Had respected Lucas's commitment to protecting his team even while choosing to push his own limits. Lucas pulled Maya's covers back over her shoulders, kissed her forehead, and whispered into the starlit darkness. I'm trying, Evan. I'm trying to make it count. The following week brought new challenges, a critical bug in production that required emergency attention, a key team member requesting FMLA leave for a family crisis, a tense negotiation with a client who wanted to add scope without extending the timeline. Through all of it, Lucas held his boundaries. He assembled a small emergency response team for the bug, paying overtime fairly, and ensuring everyone got rest breaks. He approved the FMLA request immediately and redistributed work to avoid overwhelming the remaining team. He told the scope creep client that additional features meant additional time, period. On Friday afternoon, Claire invited him to her office. "How are you holding up?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit in one of the comfortable chairs by her window. "Tired, but okay. It's been an intense week. I noticed you handled the production crisis without burning anyone out. Turns out you can fix critical bugs without demanding 24-hour shifts if you actually plan the response thoughtfully." Claire smiled. "Imagine that." She pulled out a folder from her desk. "I wanted to show you something. The employee satisfaction survey results just came in." She slid the folder across to Lucas. He opened it, scanning the executive summary. Overall satisfaction up 15% from last quarter. Work-life balance scores significantly improved. Comment section filled with specific praise for new overtime policies and mandatory rest periods. Then he saw a section that made him pause. Most trusted managers, ranked by employee vote. His name was third on the list. Top 5%, Claire noted. And the comments specifically mention your team. People want to work for managers who treat them like humans. Lucas read through some of the anonymous comments. Lucas Reed actually cares if we have lives outside work. "First manager I've had who tells me to go home instead of stay late. He fights for us with clients and upper management." "I don't know what to say," Lucas admitted. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being exactly who you are." Claire paused. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I do need you to say something at the town hall next month. Have you thought about your message?" "I've thought about it constantly. I'm just not sure I can stand in front of everyone and talk about Evan without falling apart." "Then don't talk about Evan specifically. Talk about why you believe in the policies. Talk about what changed in your management philosophy. Talk about your daughter, about wanting to be present for her. Make it personal without making it about the tragedy." Lucas considered this. "I could do that. Talk about being a single parent, about realizing that everyone on my team has someone waiting for them at home, about understanding that we're all more than our jobs." That's perfect. That's exactly what people need to hear. Not from the CEO mandating policy, but from a peer explaining why he chooses to enforce it. They spent the next 30 minutes outlining talking points, key messages, and the tone Lucas wanted to strike. Not preachy or superior, but honest about his own journey toward better boundaries. When Lucas left Claire's office that evening, he felt something unexpected. Anticipation instead of dread. The town hall was still weeks away, but he was starting to believe he had something worthwhile to say. He picked Maya up from daycare, took her out for pizza at her favorite place with the terrible murals and excellent breadsticks, and let her tell him elaborate stories about the playground politics of 4-year-olds. "Sarah said I couldn't be the princess and the dragon," Maya explained seriously through a mouthful of cheese. "But I told her that's limiting my potential." "Limiting your potential?" Lucas tried not to laugh. "Where did you hear that phrase?" "Miss Rodriguez says we should never let anyone limit our potential, so I was both the princess and the dragon. Sarah was the knight. It worked out." "Sounds like you're quite the negotiator." "I learned from watching you, Daddy. You're always talking about boundaries and respect and stuff." Lucas felt his chest tighten with emotion. She was watching, learning, building her understanding of how people should treat each other based on what she saw him do. No pressure or anything. "That's right, Maya Bean. Boundaries and respect. Remember those words, okay?" "Okay, can I have ice cream now?" "Absolutely." They got ice cream. They went home. They read 3 stories instead of 2 because it was Friday and rules could bend sometimes. Lucas tucked her in, turned on her star nightlight, and stood in the doorway watching her drift off to sleep. He thought about Evan, about the letter, about the town hall speech he'd agreed to give. He thought about Claire, carrying her own grief while trying to build something better. He thought about his team, trusting him to protect their time and dignity. Most of all, he thought about the small person in the bed, who deserved a father who was present, who modeled healthy boundaries, who showed her that work was important but people were more important. Lucas's phone buzzed, a text from Claire. "Forgot to mention, the board approved funding for 2 additional safety officers. Your advocacy at Monday's meeting made the difference. Thank you for using your voice." He texted back, Thank you for creating a space where that voice actually matters. Lucas pocketed his phone, took one last look at Maya sleeping peacefully, and headed to his own room. Monday would bring new challenges, new opportunities to either enforce boundaries or let them slip, new tests of whether he really believed what he claimed to believe. But tonight, he'd done enough, been enough, protected the people who mattered while building something that might prevent another family from losing someone they loved. It wasn't redemption, wasn't forgiveness, wasn't absolution for Evan's death, but maybe it was something better. The choice to transform pain into purpose, to honor loss by protecting the living, to be the kind of leader Evan had believed he already was. Lucas turned off his light, climbed into bed, and for the first time in 4 years, fell asleep without the weight of unspoken guilt crushing his chest. Progress, he thought as sleep pulled him under. Slow, difficult, imperfect progress. But progress nonetheless. The progress Lucas felt that Friday night proved fragile over the following weeks. Not because he stopped believing in boundaries or started compromising his principles, but because maintaining them required constant vigilance against a corporate culture that still defaulted to extraction over sustainability. 3 days before the town hall, a crisis tested everything he'd committed to. It started with an email at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning, marked urgent, from a client Lucas had never heard of. Apparently during a leadership meeting he'd missed while attending Maya's parent-teacher conference, the company had agreed to take on an emergency consulting project for a Fortune 500 company whose internal systems had catastrophically failed. The scope was massive, the timeline was impossible. And according to the email, Lucas's team had been volunteered to lead the technical implementation. He was still reading the details when his phone rang, Claire's name on the screen. "Please tell me you've seen the Morrison Chen email," she said without preamble. "I'm looking at it now. Claire, what the hell is this? My team wasn't consulted. We're already at capacity with Henderson and the Peterson migration." "I know. The board made the decision yesterday afternoon while I was in New York meeting with investors. By the time I landed and saw the contract, it was already signed." Lucas felt the old familiar anger rising, the same helpless rage he'd experienced 4 years ago when management overruled his safety concerns. "So let me guess. They expect us to just absorb the work. Weekend shifts, extended hours, all hands on deck until we deliver the impossible." "That's exactly what they expect." Claire's voice was tight with frustration. "Marcus presented it as a huge revenue opportunity, said your team's the most reliable in the company, that you'd understand the strategic importance. Understanding strategic importance and having the bandwidth to execute are two different things." Lucas was already pulling up his team's current workload, running mental calculations. "We'd need to double our hours for 6 weeks minimum. That's not sustainable. That's not what we agreed to build here." "I know." "So what do you want me to do? Because I'm not doing this, Claire. I'm not asking my team to sacrifice their lives for a contract that was signed without their input or consent." There was a long pause. When Claire spoke again, her voice was different. Not the CEO, but the woman who'd stood in a darkened conference room and promised to burn down systems that ground people into dust. "I want you to tell them no. I want you to come to the emergency board meeting this afternoon and explain exactly why this violates everything we've been trying to build. I want you to be the voice of reason I can't be because they'll dismiss me as being too emotional about policies named after my dead brother." Lucas closed his eyes, gripping his phone tighter. "You're asking me to stand in front of the board and potentially torpedo a massive contract. I'm asking you to protect your team the way you've been protecting them for weeks now, the way Evan knew you would." Claire's voice softened. "I can't order you to do this, Lucas. It has to be your choice. But I need someone in that room who isn't afraid to say that some opportunities aren't worth the human cost." "What time is the meeting?" 2 o'clock, conference room A. "I'll be there." Lucas hung up and stared at his screen, at the impossible project timeline, at the casual assumption that his team's time and health were resources to be allocated without consultation. He thought about Evan working through the night alone, about the hospital waiting room, about Maya asking when Daddy would be home for dinner. Then he opened a new document and started writing notes for the most important presentation of his career. At 1:30 that afternoon, Lucas stood outside conference room A, watching through the glass walls as board members assembled. He recognized most of them from company events and quarterly presentations. Serious people in expensive suits, people who measured success in stock prices and profit margins, people who had never worked a 16-hour shift in their lives. Marcus Chen spotted him and waved him in early. "Lucas, glad you could make it. I assume you've reviewed the Morrison Chen opportunity?" "I've reviewed it," Lucas said neutrally, taking a seat at the table. "Excellent. We're going to need your team firing on all cylinders for this one. It's a game changer for the company, the kind of client that opens doors to entire market segments." "I understand the strategic value," Lucas said carefully. "I have concerns about the execution timeline. Concerns we can address, but the board wants to hear directly from you about implementation strategy." Marcus smiled confidently. "Show them why you're the best project manager we have." Claire entered at 1:55, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes meeting Lucas's with something that looked like solidarity or maybe desperation. She took her seat at the head of the table as the remaining board members settled in. "Thank you all for making time on short notice," Claire began. "We're here to discuss implementation strategy for the Morrison Chen contract. As you know, this represents a significant revenue opportunity, but also a compressed timeline. I've asked Lucas Reed, our senior project manager, to provide his assessment." All eyes turned to Lucas. He opened his laptop, pulled up his presentation, and took a breath. "I've analyzed the Morrison Chen scope against our current capacity and the safety protocols we implemented this year. Based on that analysis, I don't believe we can deliver this project on the proposed timeline without violating the Evan Bennett Memorial Safety Protocol." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. One of the board members, a woman Lucas didn't recognize, frowned. "Can you elaborate on what you mean by violating the safety protocol?" Lucas pulled up a slide showing his team's current workload. "My team is currently allocated at 92% capacity across 3 active projects. The Morrison Chen scope would require an additional 2,000 hours over 6 weeks. To fit that into the timeline, we'd need team members working an average of 65 hours per week, including weekends, with no scheduled rest periods." "That's not uncommon in consulting," another board member interjected. "Industry standard for emergency implementations." "It may be industry standard," Lucas said evenly, "but it directly violates the policies this company adopted specifically to prevent employee burnout and health crises. The same policies that have reduced our turnover by 40% and improved our quality metrics significantly." Marcus leaned forward, his friendly demeanor cooling slightly. "Lucas, we all appreciate your commitment to work-life balance, but this is an exceptional circumstance. Sometimes exceptional circumstances require exceptional effort." "I agree, but exceptional effort doesn't have to mean unsustainable hours. If Morrison Chen is truly a priority, we have options that don't require violating our own policies." "Such as?" Claire prompted, and Lucas caught the slight edge of relief in her voice. He pulled up his next slide. "Option 1, extend the timeline to 12 weeks instead of 6. This allows us to deliver the same scope at sustainable hours without compromising quality. Option 2, reduce the initial scope to what's achievable in 6 weeks, then deliver remaining features in a phase 2. Option 3, hire contract staff specifically for this project, distributed across multiple teams so no single group exceeds safe working hours." "All of those options either delay delivery or increase costs," Marcus said sharply. "The client wants this done in 6 weeks at the quoted price." "Then the client's expectations aren't aligned with our operational capabilities," Lucas replied. "We can deliver fast, cheap, or sustainable. Pick 2. They've asked for all 3. The unknown board member spoke up again. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate your analysis, but ultimately business decisions need to balance multiple factors. Employee welfare is important, but so is company growth, competitive positioning, and shareholder value." "I understand that," Lucas said, feeling his heart rate accelerate but keeping his voice steady. "But I'd ask you to consider the long-term cost of the decision you're making here. If we accept this contract on these terms, we signal to employees that the safety protocols are negotiable, that when revenue is involved, their well-being becomes optional." "That's a bit dramatic," Marcus interjected. "Is it? Because 4 years ago we lost an exceptional engineer to a stress-induced cardiac event while he worked overnight to meet a deadline. Evan Bennett was 26 years old. He died at his desk because the company culture at that time prioritized delivery over people." The room went silent. Several board members glanced at Claire, whose expression remained carefully neutral. Lucas continued, his voice quiet but firm. The protocols we put in place aren't abstract policies. They're specific protections designed to prevent that from happening again. Every time we make an exception, every time we decide revenue justifies risk, we inch closer to the culture that killed Evan. And eventually we'll be right back where we started. With all due respect, another board member said, one tragic incident doesn't mean every demanding project will result in catastrophe. You're right, it doesn't. Most people who work excessive overtime don't die. They just burn out, develop health problems, damage their relationships, and eventually leave for companies that treat them better. Lucas pulled up another slide showing industry research on burnout and turnover costs. The average cost of replacing a skilled engineer is 150% of their annual salary. We've reduced turnover 40% since implementing safety protocols. That's not just ethically right. It's financially smart. Marcus was shaking his head. Lucas, nobody's saying we don't value employees. But you're presenting this as a binary choice when it's really about flexibility and trust. Trust that your team understands this is a unique situation. Trust that they'll step up when the company needs them. I do trust my team, Lucas said. That's exactly why I won't ask them to step up in ways that compromise their health and safety. Trust works both ways. They need to trust that I'll protect them when management makes unrealistic demands. So your recommendation is to turn down a 7-figure contract? The skepticism in the board member's voice was palpable. My recommendation is to renegotiate terms that allow us to deliver excellent work without violating our stated values. If Morrison Chen won't accept a timeline that protects our people, then yes, I'd recommend walking away. Marcus stood abruptly. This is exactly why operational managers shouldn't have veto power over strategic decisions. Claire, with all respect to Lucas's principles, we can't build a company by turning down major clients because the work might be demanding. Claire stood as well, her voice cutting across the tension. And we can't build a sustainable company by treating our stated values as suggestions we ignore when money's involved. Lucas isn't being unreasonable. He's holding us accountable to standards we publicly committed to. Standards you championed because of personal tragedy, Marcus shot back. I understand why this is emotional for you, but business can't be run on emotion. This isn't emotion, it's integrity. Claire's voice was ice now. We told employees we changed. We told them their well-being mattered. We built entire marketing campaigns around being an employer that values people. And now, at the first significant test, you want to prove that was all performance? I want to prove we can be both ethical and competitive, Marcus countered. Then support Lucas's recommendations. Renegotiate the timeline or the scope. Show Morrison Chen that we deliver quality by respecting the people who produce it. Claire turned to address the full board. Lucas's team has the highest quality ratings and lowest bug counts in the company. Client satisfaction with his projects is consistently above 90%. That's not despite his commitment to boundaries, it's because of it. Sustainable pace produces better results. The unknown board member spoke up. Can we put this to a vote? I'd like to hear from everyone on whether we should attempt to renegotiate the Morrison Chen terms or proceed with the original timeline. Claire nodded. All in favor of supporting Lucas's recommendation to renegotiate for sustainable delivery terms? Claire's hand went up immediately. 2 other board members raised theirs after a moment's hesitation. 5 hands stayed down, including Marcus. Motion fails, Claire said quietly. The board has decided to proceed with the original Morrison Chen timeline. She turned to Lucas and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. Apology, frustration, and a question she couldn't voice aloud in front of the board. Lucas stood, gathering his laptop. Then I need to be clear about something. I won't be implementing this project under the proposed terms. I won't ask my team to work unsustainable hours. If the board insists on accepting this contract with this timeline, you'll need to assign it to a different manager. Lucas, Marcus started, I'm not being difficult. I'm being consistent with the values this company claims to hold. If those values are negotiable, then I'm in the wrong place. Lucas looked directly at Claire. I became a manager because I believe leadership means protecting the people who trust you. I can't do that and deliver Morrison Chen on these terms. Someone needs to choose. He walked out before anyone could respond. his hands shaking slightly as he pulled the conference room door closed behind him. The elevator ride to his floor felt endless. Lucas's mind raced through calculations. Could he really walk away from this job? What would that mean for Maya, for his mortgage, for his carefully constructed stability? But underneath the practical concerns ran a deeper certainty. He couldn't go back to being the manager who approved dangerous overtime. Not after Evan. Not after everything he'd learned. Priya looked up as he approached his desk, immediately reading something in his expression. "Boss, you okay?" "Honestly, I don't know yet." Lucas sank into his chair, staring at his screen without seeing it. "I might have just quit." What happened? He explained the Morrison Chen situation, the board meeting, his ultimatum. Priya listened with increasing alarm. "They can't seriously expect us to work those hours," she said when he finished. "The board voted to accept the contract with the original timeline. They're planning to assign it to this team. And you said no. I said I wouldn't implement it under those terms. So they'll either reassign the project or fire me, maybe both." Priya was quiet for a moment, then stood decisively. "If they reassign it to someone else and that person tries to implement it with this team, I'm refusing too. I didn't stick around through the protocol changes just to watch us slide back into the old culture. Priya, don't put your job at risk for this. Too late. You've spent months showing us that boundaries actually matter, that managers can advocate for their teams instead of just passing down impossible demands. I'm not going back to the old way either." Before Lucas could respond, his email chimed. A meeting request from Claire for 4:30, marked urgent, subject line blank. The next 2 hours crawled by. Lucas tried to focus on code reviews, on responding to normal operational emails, on anything that would distract from the fact that he might have just destroyed his career over a principle. At 4:25, he headed back to the executive floor. Claire was alone in her office when he arrived, standing at the window overlooking the city, her posture radiating exhaustion. "Close the door," she said without turning around. Lucas did, remaining standing near the door, uncertain. "That was brave," Claire said finally, still facing the window. "Stupid, but brave." "I couldn't do it, Claire. I couldn't compromise everything we've been building." "I know. That's why I called you here." She turned to face him, and Lucas saw that her eyes were red. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you respond." "Okay?" "I submitted my resignation to the board an hour ago." Lucas felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What? Claire, no! Let me finish." Her voice was firm despite the emotion behind it. "I told them that if they won't support the values we've spent 8 months implementing, then I'm not the right CEO for this company. That I didn't take this position to watch us become another tech firm that grinds people into dust for quarterly earnings. They'll accept your resignation. You know they will. Marcus probably already has a replacement in mind." "Maybe. But I also told them something else." Claire moved away from the window, sitting on the edge of her desk rather than behind it. "I told them about Evan's letter. The one where he explained that you tried to protect him from his own ambition. I read it to the entire board." Lucas's breath caught. "Why?" "Because they needed to understand that the protocols aren't abstract. They're not bureaucratic obstacles to profit. They're protections built from real loss by people who understand the actual cost of failure." Claire's voice wavered. "I told them that Evan died because the old culture valued output over humanity. That I became CEO specifically to change that. And that if they're not willing to change with me, they should accept my resignation and find someone who will take them back to the way things were." "What did they say?" "They're voting tomorrow morning. Either they'll accept both our resignations and move forward with Morrison Chen as planned, or they'll support renegotiating the contract terms." Claire met his eyes. "I can't predict which way it'll go, but I needed you to know that you're not alone in this. That someone else believes principles are worth more than profit." Lucas moved further into the office, sinking into one of the chairs facing her desk. "You shouldn't have risked your position for this." "Why not? You risked yours." Claire smiled sadly. "Besides, what's the point of being CEO if I can't actually lead? If I just implement whatever the board decides, regardless of whether it aligns with our stated mission? Most CEOs would say the point is maximizing shareholder value." Most CEOs didn't watch their brother die at 26 from stress-induced cardiac arrest. Claire's voice hardened. I didn't fight my way into this position to maintain a system that kills people. I did it to build something better. If the board won't let me do that, then I'm in the wrong company. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who'd found themselves on the same side of a battle neither had wanted to fight. What happens if they accept our resignations? Lucas asked quietly. Then we figure out what comes next. You find another company that actually values your principles. I start consulting or teaching or something that lets me sleep at night. Claire shrugged. We survive. We move forward. We don't compromise who we are for jobs that demand we betray our values. I have a 4-year-old daughter depending on me. I know, and she's watching how you handle this, learning what it means to stand up for what you believe even when it costs you something. Claire's expression softened. What do you want her to learn, Lucas? That principles matter only when they're convenient, or that some things are worth fighting for even when the outcome is uncertain? Lucas thought about Maya in her classroom, refusing to let Sarah limit her potential, negotiating for what she believed was fair. He thought about the conversations they'd have someday about work, about integrity, about choosing dignity over compliance. I want her to learn that you fight for what's right, he said finally. Even when you're scared, even when you might lose. Then you're already teaching her that. Claire stood, moving around her desk to pull out a folder. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to have this. It's documentation of everything you've accomplished since the protocols were implemented. Quality metrics, client satisfaction scores, team retention rates, cost savings from reduced turnover. If you need to find another job, you'll have proof that your approach works. Lucas took the folder, overwhelmed. Thank you. Thank you for being someone worth fighting alongside. Claire extended her hand formally. Whatever the board decides, I'm grateful we had these 8 months to try building something better. Lucas shook her hand, holding on perhaps a moment longer than professionally necessary. Me too. He left her office carrying the folder, feeling simultaneously terrified and strangely liberated. The uncertainty was awful. Not knowing if he'd have a job tomorrow, not knowing how he'd explain to Maya if they had to move or change their lives. But underneath the fear ran something clearer. He'd stood up for what mattered, had refused to compromise the people who trusted him, had proven that the guilt he'd carried for 4 years had transformed into something more useful than self-destruction, the determination to protect others from the same fate. That evening, Lucas picked Maya up from daycare and took her to their favorite playground. She ran straight for the swings, demanding he push her higher. Daddy, higher! He pushed her, watching her laugh against the sky, and tried not to think about what tomorrow might bring. Daddy, why do you look sad? Maya asked between swings. Not sad, sweetheart, just thinking about work stuff. Is work being mean to you? Lucas smiled despite everything. Work is complicated. Sometimes you have to make hard choices about what's important. Like when I had to choose between being princess or dragon. Exactly like that, except you figured out you could be both. Because I'm smart and don't let people limit my potential. Maya said it with such serious conviction that Lucas had to laugh. That's right, you're very smart. Are you being smart at work? Lucas caught the swing, stopping Maya's momentum so he could crouch down to her level. I'm trying to be. I'm trying to do what's right even though it's hard. Like you do when you stand up for yourself on the playground. That's good, Daddy. Miss Rodriguez says doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. Miss Rodriguez is very wise. I know, she's my second favorite person. You're my first. Lucas pulled Maya into a hug, holding his daughter close and thinking about all the moments like this that mattered more than any job, any title, any amount of professional security. I love you, Maya Bean. I love you too, Daddy. Can we get ice cream? We can definitely get ice cream. They got ice cream. They went home. They made dinner together, Maya standing on her step stool to help stir pasta sauce, while chattering about playground politics and her plans to become both a CEO and a dragon when she grew up. After Maya was asleep, Lucas sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at his phone. Part of him wanted to text Claire, to ask if she'd heard anything, to strategize about next steps. Part of him wanted to start updating his resume, preparing for the worst. Instead, he opened his photos and scrolled back 4 years, to pictures from the Morrison platform launch party. There was Evan, grinning at the camera with a beer in hand, celebrating the successful delivery of the project that had killed him 3 weeks later. Young, brilliant, full of potential that would never be realized. Lucas stared at that photo for a long time, remembering the guilt, the grief, the crushing weight of responsibility. Then he swiped forward through the years, pictures of Maya as a baby, as a toddler, growing into the fierce little person sleeping down the hall. Pictures of himself slowly learning to smile again, to be present, to believe he deserved happiness. And finally, a photo from last week. Lucas and Claire at a company event, standing side by side, both of them looking tired but determined. Two people trying to build something better from the wreckage of loss. Lucas set down his phone and finished his coffee, ready as he'd ever be for whatever tomorrow would bring. Tomorrow arrived with rain, the kind of steady downpour that made the morning school run feel like navigating through gray static. Maya complained about her raincoat, insisted on wearing her princess rain boots that clashed terribly with her outfit, and talked nonstop about an elaborate game involving mermaids and astronauts that made absolutely no sense but required Lucas's complete attention. He was grateful for the distraction. It kept him from checking his phone every 30 seconds, from imagining the board meeting happening without him, from calculating how long his savings would last if he suddenly became unemployed. "Daddy, you're not listening," Maya announced from the back seat. "I am listening. The mermaid astronauts discovered an underwater moon base. No, that was 5 minutes ago. Now they're negotiating with the octopus president about trade agreements." "Right, of course. The octopus president, what are they trading?" "Dignity and respect," Maya said seriously, and Lucas nearly drove off the road. "Where did you hear that phrase?" "You say it all the time. You tell your team that you're trading dignity and respect, not just money and time." Lucas pulled into the preschool parking lot, put the car in park, and turned to look at his daughter. She was swinging her legs, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just articulated his entire management philosophy in 8 words. "You're right, Maya Bean. That's exactly what we should be trading." "I know. That's why the octopus president is very successful. He values his employees." Lucas walked her to the classroom door, kissed her goodbye, and watched her immediately take charge of the block corner before heading back to his car. His phone showed 2 missed calls from the office and a text from Priya asking if he was okay. He sat in the parking lot with rain drumming on the roof, staring at those notifications, and realized he couldn't hide at Maya's preschool all day, no matter how appealing that sounded. The office was unusually quiet when Lucas arrived at 9:15. He'd expected whispers, sideways glances, the awkward atmosphere that comes when everyone knows something dramatic happened, but nobody wants to acknowledge it directly. Instead, people looked up as he passed, nodded normally, went back to their work. Either the board meeting hadn't happened yet, or the decision had been made and somehow nobody knew. Priya was waiting at his desk with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested she'd been there a while. "You didn't answer your phone," she said, handing him one of the cups. "I was doing the preschool drop-off. What's happening?" "Nobody knows." Claire's assistant sent out a calendar hold for an all-hands meeting at 11, but there's no agenda, no context. People are starting to panic. Lucas sank into his chair, wrapping his hands around the warm coffee cup. "They're either announcing new leadership or announcing we renegotiated Morrison Chen. Those are the only 2 options." "Or they're announcing that you and Claire quit and we're all screwed," Priya added quietly. "That's option 3. Yes." They sat in tense silence, drinking coffee, watching the clock tick toward 11. Around them, the normal office sounds continued. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the hum of focused work. Lucas tried to do code reviews to focus on the Henderson project status, to accomplish something productive. At 10:45, his phone rang. Claire's number. "Lucas, can you come to my office? Now, please." Her tone gave nothing away. Lucas stood, ignoring Priya's questioning look, and headed to the elevator. Claire's office door was open when he arrived. She stood at her desk, still in her coat, looking like she'd just arrived herself. But her expression was different from yesterday, less exhausted, more determined. "Close the door," she said. Lucas did, his heart hammering. "What happened?" "Sit down first. Claire, just tell me. Did they accept our resignations?" She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "They rejected them, both of them, unanimously." Lucas felt his knees go weak. He sat heavily in the nearest chair. What? The board voted this morning to reject our resignations and to support renegotiating the Morrison-Chen contract terms. Marcus abstained but didn't vote against. Everyone else voted in favor. I don't understand. Yesterday they voted the other way. Claire moved around her desk, perching on the edge like she had the day before. Yesterday they voted based on revenue projections and competitive positioning. Last night 3 things happened. First, I sent them all a copy of Evan's letter along with a detailed analysis of our improved metrics since implementing the safety protocols. Second, our head of HR sent them turnover cost data showing we've saved over $2 million in replacement costs this year alone. Third, 2 board members who weren't at yesterday's meeting called an emergency session and demanded a revote. Who were the 2 board members? Patricia Henderson and David Morrison. Lucas blinked, as in Henderson Project and Morrison Platform? Those are named after board members? Patricia Henderson's daughter works in our engineering department. David Morrison's son was Evan's roommate in college. Claire's voice softened. Patricia called me at 11 last night, said her daughter came home crying because she'd heard the company might be sliding back to the old culture. Said she didn't invest in this company to watch it treat employees the way her previous employer had treated her. And Morrison? David knew Evan personally. Knew how brilliant he was, how driven. When I read him the letter Evan wrote, the part about you trying to protect him from his own ambition, David said he wished someone had protected his son the same way during his startup years, that his son burned out at 28 and took 3 years to recover. Claire's eyes were bright with unshed tears. He said he didn't want this company contributing to that kind of damage. Lucas felt something unknot in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying since yesterday afternoon finally releasing. So what happens now? Now I call Morrison-Chen and explain that we can deliver their project excellently over 12 weeks or adequately over 6 weeks. Their choice. If they choose 12 weeks, we proceed. If they insist on 6 weeks, we walk away and the board supports that decision. And if they walk away, then we've proven our values aren't negotiable, and we find clients who respect that. Claire stood, smoothing her skirt. Marcus isn't happy about it. He thinks we're leaving money on the table, but he's agreed to abide by the board's decision. What changed his mind? He didn't change his mind. He was outvoted. But the board made it clear, if he can't support the direction we're taking, they'll find a CFO who can. Claire's expression was almost apologetic. This isn't a complete victory, Lucas. We still have people in leadership who think we're being too idealistic. We'll face these battles again, but for now, we won this round. Lucas stood, feeling lighter than he had in days. Thank you for fighting for this. Thank you for being worth fighting for. Claire glanced at her watch. We have the all hands in 10 minutes. I'm announcing the board's decision and our commitment to the safety protocols. I'd like you there with me. Will you stand with me while I explain this? The question felt heavier than it should, weighted with symbolism and solidarity and the understanding that they were publicly aligning themselves with principles that not everyone in the company supported. Of course, Lucas said. What do you need me to do? Just stand there. Look competent and committed. Maybe share a few words about why these protocols matter at the team level if people have questions. I can do that. They walked together to the large common area where all-hands meetings were held, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick, and enough room for the entire company to gather. Employees were already assembling, clustering in department groups, speculating in low voices about the mysterious meeting. Lucas spotted Priya near the front with the rest of his team. She caught his eye, her expression questioning. He gave her a subtle thumbs up and watched relief wash across her face. At exactly 11 o'clock, Claire stepped to the front of the room. The conversations died down gradually, 200 people turning their attention to the CEO, who'd been with them less than a year but had already transformed their workplace culture. Thank you all for being here, Claire began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. I know this meeting was last minute, and I appreciate your flexibility. I'm going to be direct about why we're gathered. Yesterday, the board faced a decision about whether our commitment to employee well-being was negotiable when significant revenue was at stake. She paused, letting that sink in. Lucas saw people exchanging glances, tension rippling through the crowd. We were offered a major contract with a Fortune 500 client. The timeline was aggressive. The revenue was substantial. The scope would have required multiple teams working unsustainable hours for at least 6 weeks. Claire's voice was steady, factual. The board initially voted to accept the contract on those terms. I submitted my resignation rather than implement a project that violated the Evan Bennett Memorial Safety Protocol. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back said, "Holy shit," loud enough to be heard. This morning, the board rejected my resignation. They voted unanimously to support renegotiating the contract terms to align with our values. We will be offering the client a 12-week timeline that allows sustainable delivery, or we will decline the project entirely. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some applauding, others asking questions. Claire raised her hand for silence. I need you to understand something. This decision wasn't easy. We may lose a significant client. We may face criticism from competitors who think we're being unrealistic about business demands. But we made a promise to you when we implemented these protocols. We promised that your well-being wasn't negotiable, that we wouldn't treat you as disposable resources. And this morning, the board proved we meant it. Claire gestured to Lucas. Lucas Reed, our senior project manager, refused to implement the original Morrison Chen timeline because he knew it would compromise his team's safety. He stood in front of the board and explained exactly why some opportunities aren't worth the human cost. He risked his position to protect the people who trust him. That's the kind of leadership we want to cultivate here. All eyes turned to Lucas. He felt exposed, vulnerable, acutely aware of 200 people watching him. But Claire's expression was encouraging, and somewhere in the crowd, Priya was giving him an enthusiastic thumbs up. I don't think I did anything heroic, Lucas said, his voice rougher than intended. I just couldn't ask my team to sacrifice their health and families for a deadline. We lost someone 4 years ago because the old culture made those sacrifices seem normal. I won't contribute to that culture anymore. None of us should. A woman Lucas recognized from the design team raised her hand. What happens if clients keep demanding impossible timelines? Do we just turn down every challenging project? We don't turn down challenging projects, Lucas replied. We turn down projects where challenge becomes exploitation. There's a difference between pushing yourself to grow and pushing yourself until you break. Good clients understand that difference. And if they don't understand, someone else called out. Claire fielded that one. Then they're not our clients. We're building a company that proves you can be both excellent and ethical. That sustainable pace produces better results than burnout culture. That treating people with dignity and respect isn't a competitive disadvantage, it's a competitive advantage. A young engineer near the front, someone Lucas didn't know well, spoke up nervously. My last company talked about work-life balance too. But when things got tough, those values disappeared. How do we know this is real? The question hung in the air, challenging and vulnerable. Claire looked at Lucas, silently asking permission for something. He nodded, not entirely sure what he was agreeing to, but trusting her. 4 years ago, Claire said slowly, this company lost my younger brother. Evan Bennett was a brilliant engineer, passionate about his work, driven to prove himself. He volunteered for an overnight shift to fix a critical bug before a product launch. He had an undiagnosed heart condition triggered by extreme stress and exhaustion. He died at his desk at 26 years old. The room was completely silent now. People who'd heard rumors were hearing confirmation. People who hadn't known were visibly shocked. I became CEO specifically to prevent that from ever happening again, Claire continued, her voice thick but steady. The protocols we've implemented aren't abstract corporate policy. They're protections built from real loss. And they're named after my brother because I want everyone in this company to remember that the person sitting next to you, the team member staying late, the colleague pushing themselves too hard, they're someone's brother, someone's daughter, someone's parent. They matter more than any deadline. She paused, visibly composing herself. You know this is real because yesterday I was willing to walk away rather than compromise it. Because Lucas was willing to walk away. Because the board, when forced to choose, chose people over profit. That's how you know this isn't performance. This is who we are. The silence stretched for a moment longer, then someone started clapping. It spread through the room, building into genuine applause. Lucas saw people wiping their eyes, saw the design team woman nodding approvingly, saw Priya beaming. When the applause died down, Claire wrapped up the meeting with logistics about the Morrison-Chen decision timeline and reminders about the upcoming town hall. People dispersed slowly, many lingering to talk in small groups. Lucas was heading back toward his desk when he was intercepted by a cluster of team leads he recognized from other departments. "That took guts," one of them said. "Standing up to the board like that." "It took believing our stated values were real," Lucas replied. "If we're going to have protocols, they need to mean something when tested." "Well, some of us are trying to implement similar boundaries with our teams. Would you be willing to share what's worked for you? Maybe do a working session with other managers?" Lucas found himself agreeing, exchanging contact information, making plans to share documentation and strategies. By the time he made it back to his desk, it was nearly noon, and he had half a dozen meeting requests from colleagues wanting to discuss implementation tactics. Priya was waiting with a grin that suggested she'd heard everything. "You're officially famous now," she said. "The manager who told the board to shove their 7-figure contract." "That's not exactly how I'd phrase it. That's how everyone else is phrasing it. You're a legend. People are naming their code commits after you." Lucas laughed despite himself. "Please tell me you're joking." "Only slightly. Check the repository. Someone definitely committed a feature called Read Protocol Compliance." He checked. She wasn't joking. Lucas shook his head, bemused and overwhelmed. The afternoon blurred past in a chaos of emails, impromptu conversations, and a growing realization that something had shifted in the company culture. People were talking openly about boundaries, about pushing back on unrealistic demands, about the right to have lives outside work. The fear that had permeated these discussions before, the worry that advocating for yourself meant seeming weak or uncommitted, had lessened noticeably. At 4:30, Lucas packed up his things and headed toward the exit, determined to pick Maya up on time. Claire caught him at the elevator. "Morrison-Chen called," she said without preamble. "They agreed to the 12-week timeline." Lucas felt relief wash through him. "Really? Just like that?" "Not just like that. I had to explain our reasoning, walk them through our quality metrics, and demonstrate that sustainable delivery produces better results." But their CTO was impressed. Said most vendors just tell them what they want to hear, then deliver buggy products because the team was too exhausted to do it right. Claire smiled. "Apparently we're not the only ones tired of burnout culture producing garbage results. So we keep the revenue and maintain our principles." "We do. The board is satisfied. Marcus is grudgingly impressed. And we've proven the model works." She paused. "I also finalized the town hall details. It's Friday afternoon. I still want you to speak if you're willing." Lucas had almost forgotten about the town hall in the chaos of the past 48 hours. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth. Why these protocols matter to you. What changed in your approach to leadership. Why you believe sustainable pace produces better results." Claire's expression was gentle. "You don't have to talk about Evan specifically if you don't want to. But I think people need to hear from a working manager why this isn't just theory." "I'll do it," Lucas said. "I've been thinking about what to say. I think I'm ready. Thank you for everything this week, but especially for being willing to lose your job rather than compromise your team. Thank you for building a company where that kind of stand doesn't automatically mean career suicide." They parted at the elevator, Claire heading back to handle evening calls with West Coast clients, Lucas heading to pick up his daughter, who was probably currently negotiating complex trade agreements with the Octopus president. The week after the board meeting settled into a new normal, Lucas implemented the Morrison-Chen project with a 12-week timeline that allowed his team to work reasonable hours while delivering quality results. Other departments started adopting similar boundary-setting practices, referencing Lucas's approach in their own negotiations with clients. The company rumor mill turned Lucas into something between a folk hero and a cautionary tale, depending on who was telling the story. Some employees saw him as proof that standing up for principles was possible. Others thought he'd gotten lucky, and that most people who challenged the board wouldn't have such supportive outcomes. Lucas tried not to think about his new reputation and focused on the work, managing his team, mentoring newer managers on boundary setting, preparing for the town hall speech that loomed at the end of the week. Thursday evening, after Maya was asleep, Lucas sat at his kitchen table with notes spread across the surface. He'd been drafting and revising his town hall remarks for days, struggling to find the right balance between personal truth and professional message. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "How's the speech prep going?" "Honestly, I've written 17 versions and they all feel wrong." "What feels wrong about them?" Lucas stared at his scattered notes, trying to articulate the problem. "They're either too clinical and don't capture why this matters, or too emotional and feel like I'm weaponizing grief for corporate messaging." His phone rang. Claire's voice came through warm but direct. "Stop trying to write a speech. Just tell your story. Why did you change your approach to management? What do you want Maya to learn about work? Why does protecting your team matter to you personally?" "Because I've seen what happens when we don't protect people," Lucas said quietly. "Then say that. Say it simply, honestly, the way you'd explain it to Maya. People don't need polished corporate messaging. They need authentic human connection." After they hung up, Lucas pushed aside all 17 drafted versions and opened a fresh document. He thought about Evan's letter, about Claire standing in front of the board with her resignation, about Priya saying she wouldn't go back to the old way. He thought about Maya asking if work was being mean to him, about her declaring that dignity and respect were what mattered most. And he started writing, not a speech, but a story about loss and learning, about guilt transformed into purpose, about choosing to protect others because he'd failed to protect someone once and refused to fail again. Friday arrived faster than Lucas expected. The town hall was scheduled for 2 o'clock, giving people time to finish lunch and settle in for what was being billed as a major company address about culture and values. Lucas dropped Maya off at preschool that morning with extra hugs and the kind of nervous energy that made her look at him suspiciously. "Are you doing something scary today, Daddy?" "Kind of. I have to talk in front of a lot of people at work." "About what?" "About why it's important to be kind to the people you work with. About making sure everyone has time for their families." Maya considered this seriously. "That's not scary. That's just being nice." "You're right. It should be just being nice. But sometimes people forget that, and someone has to remind them." "Then you should remind them. You're good at reminding people about important stuff." She paused. "Like how you remind me to brush my teeth even when I don't want to." Lucas laughed. "Exactly like that. Except with fewer tantrums, hopefully." "I don't throw tantrums. I express strong preferences." "My mistake. Strong preferences." He kissed her goodbye and drove to work, his notes for the town hall sitting in his passenger seat, his heart rate already elevated with anticipation and dread. The morning crawled by. Lucas tried to focus on normal work, on responding to emails and reviewing code, but his mind kept drifting to the afternoon. At 1:30, Priya stopped by his desk. "You ready for this?" "Absolutely not, but I'm doing it anyway." "That's the spirit. For what it's worth, the whole team is proud of you. You're showing everyone that management doesn't have to mean selling out your values. I just hope I don't throw up on stage." "That would certainly make it memorable." At 1:45, Lucas headed to the warehouse space where the town hall would be held. The room was already filling, people claiming seats and clustering in familiar groups. Lucas spotted his entire team sitting together near the middle, Priya saving him a seat. Claire was at the front with her assistant doing sound checks and reviewing the presentation slides. She looked up as Lucas approached, her expression a mix of encouragement and understanding. "You've got this," she said simply. "I wrote something honest instead of polished. I hope that's okay." "That's perfect. Honest is exactly what people need." At 2 o'clock, Claire called the meeting to order. She opened with logistics about company performance, celebrated recent wins, and acknowledged ongoing challenges. Then she shifted to the main topic. "Today marks exactly 1 year since we implemented the Evan Bennett Memorial Safety Protocol. I want to talk about what we've learned, what's worked, and why this matters." She pulled up a slide showing the metrics Lucas had seen before: reduced turnover, improved quality, better client satisfaction, significant cost savings. These numbers tell one story, but numbers don't capture the human impact of treating people with dignity and respect. They don't show the parents who make it home for dinner with their kids, the employees who don't wake up dreading work, the teams who trust their managers to protect them. Claire paused. To help me explain what these changes mean at the ground level, I've asked Lucas Reed to share his perspective. Lucas manages one of our most successful teams, has consistently demonstrated that sustainable pace produces excellent results and has shown remarkable courage in defending these principles, even when it was professionally risky. Lucas stood, his notes clutched in slightly sweaty hands, and made his way to the front. 200 faces looked back at him, curious, supportive, skeptical, attentive. He'd never felt more exposed. He set his notes on the podium, took a breath, and began. "I'm not naturally good at public speaking," Lucas began, and was gratified by the scattered chuckles that rippled through the crowd. "I'm much better at code reviews and project timelines. But Claire asked me to talk about why the safety protocols matter to me personally, and I think that story is worth the discomfort of standing up here." He glanced down at his notes, then decided to set them aside. This needed to come from memory, from the heart, not from carefully edited paragraphs. 4 years ago, I approved an overnight shift for a brilliant young engineer who insisted he could handle it. The project was critical, the deadline was tight, and he volunteered enthusiastically. I trusted his judgment. I also trusted that one night wouldn't hurt, that exceptional circumstances sometimes required exceptional effort. Lucas paused, his throat tight. 3 days later, I stood in a hospital waiting room and watched doctors tell a family that their son was gone. Evan Bennett was 26 years old. He died at his desk while I was home sleeping. The room was completely silent. Lucas could see people leaning forward, fully attentive now. I blamed myself, completely. I believed I'd killed him by approving that shift, by not forcing him to rest, by prioritizing a product launch over a human life. I wrote my resignation that night. Management refused to accept it, told me it was a tragic accident, that no one could have predicted it. But I knew better. I knew I'd failed to protect someone who trusted me. Lucas's voice wavered slightly. He took a breath, steadied himself. I became a father 2 years later. My daughter Maya is 4 now, and she's fierce and opinionated and absolutely certain she's going to be both a CEO and a dragon when she grows up. Being her parent changed everything about how I see work, because every time I look at her, I think about Evan's parents losing their child. I think about how fragile life is, how every person on every team I manage is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's person who matters more than any deadline or revenue target. He looked out at the crowd, making eye contact with individuals scattered throughout the room. The safety protocols we implemented aren't abstract policy to me. They're specific protections designed to prevent other families from experiencing what Evan's family experienced. They're my attempt to transform the worst failure of my career into something that might protect the people who trust me now. A woman near the front raised her hand tentatively. Claire nodded for her to speak. How do you balance that with business demands? Clients don't care about our safety protocols. They just want their projects delivered fast. Lucas nodded, having expected this question. You're right that clients don't care initially, but I've learned that good clients appreciate honest conversations about what's sustainable versus what's destructive. When I tell a client we can deliver excellent work in 12 weeks or rushed work in 6, most of them choose excellence once they understand the trade-off. The ones who don't choose excellence aren't clients worth having. But doesn't that mean we lose business? Another voice called out. Sometimes, yes. We turned down projects this year because clients refused to accept sustainable timelines. But we also retained every single person on my team. 0 turnover. Do you know what it costs to replace a skilled engineer? More than most projects are worth. We're not losing money by enforcing boundaries. We're investing in the people who make this company successful. Marcus Chen, the CFO, who'd opposed the board decision, spoke up from the back. Lucas makes a good point about retention costs. Since implementing these protocols, we've reduced turnover-related expenses by over $2 million annually. That's not even counting the quality improvements and client satisfaction increases. Lucas was surprised but grateful for the support. He caught Marcus's eye and nodded acknowledgement before continuing. I want to be clear about something. Enforcing boundaries doesn't mean avoiding hard work or never being challenged. My team still pushes themselves, still takes on complex projects, still delivers excellent results. But they do it during reasonable hours, with adequate rest knowing their manager will protect them from unrealistic demands. That trust produces better work than fear and exhaustion ever could. Priya stood up, surprising Lucas. I've worked for managers who demanded constant overtime, who treated boundaries as weakness, Who made you feel guilty for having a life outside work? Lucas is the first manager I've had who fights for us, who tells clients no when they ask for impossible timelines, who actually means it when he says our well-being matters. And you know what? I've never been more productive, more creative, or more committed to my work, because I'm not constantly exhausted and resentful. Several people applauded. Lucas felt his eyes sting with unexpected emotion. Another hand went up. A young engineer Lucas recognized from the new hire orientation. I just started 2 months ago. My previous company had great policies on paper, but managers ignored them when things got busy. How do I know this is real here? That it won't disappear when we hit a rough quarter? Before Lucas could respond, Claire stepped forward. That's a fair question. Let me tell you what happened 2 weeks ago. The board voted to accept a 7-figure contract that would have required multiple teams to work unsustainable hours. Lucas refused to implement it. I submitted my resignation rather than compromise our values. The board had to choose between significant revenue and the principles we'd committed to. She paused for effect. They chose principles. They rejected our resignations and supported renegotiating the contract terms. That's how you know this is real, because when tested at the highest level, our commitment to people over profit held firm. The room erupted in conversation. People were nodding, talking to neighbors, several looking visibly emotional. Lucas saw the young engineer wipe his eyes, saw Priya grinning fiercely, saw other managers taking notes. Claire raised her hand for quiet. I want to add something to what Lucas said. These protocols are named after my brother because his death taught me that no amount of success justifies destroying the people who create it. Evan was brilliant, passionate, driven. He volunteered for that overnight shift because he loved his work. But the culture that made overwork seem heroic killed him, and I refused to perpetuate that culture. She looked directly at Lucas. When I became CEO, I found a letter Evan had written 2 days before he died. In it, he talked about Lucas, about how Lucas constantly tried to protect him from his own ambition, how Lucas treated people like humans instead of resources, how Lucas was the kind of leader Evan aspired to be. My brother saw in Lucas what I've seen in the past year. Someone who understands that real leadership means protecting the people who trust you, even when it's professionally inconvenient. Lucas felt his careful composure cracking. He hadn't expected Claire to share that detail publicly. She continued, her voice strong despite the emotion behind it. We've built something rare here, a company that proves you can be both excellent and ethical, that sustainable pace produces better results than burnout culture, that people are more valuable than quarterly earnings. But maintaining that requires all of us, managers who enforce boundaries, employees who respect them, leadership that supports both even when it costs us something. An older engineer near the back stood up. Lucas recognized him as someone who'd been with the company for over a decade. I've watched this company change a lot over the years. Not all changes were good, but this one is. I've got grandkids now. I want to see them grow up. These protocols mean I might actually make it to retirement without destroying my health. So thank you, both of you, for being willing to risk your jobs to protect ours. The applause that followed was genuine, sustained, and overwhelming. Lucas stood at the front trying to process the moment, the faces, the emotion, the sense that something significant had shifted in how this company understood its relationship with the people who made it function. When the applause died down, Claire wrapped up with logistics about ongoing safety training, anonymous reporting systems for violations, and reminders that the protocols only worked if everyone participated. People began dispersing, but many lingered to talk in small groups or approach Lucas and Claire directly. A junior manager Lucas barely knew pulled him aside. I've been struggling with how to push back on unrealistic deadlines without seeming uncommitted. Thank you for modeling what that looks like. It helps to see someone senior actually doing it successfully. It's not always successful, Lucas admitted. Sometimes clients do walk away. Sometimes projects get delayed, but I sleep better knowing I'm not destroying my team for revenue. That's what I needed to hear. Thank you. Over the next 30 minutes, Lucas had similar conversations with at least a dozen people. Managers asking for advice on boundary setting, employees thanking him for creating a template they could reference when advocating for themselves, even a couple of skeptics who respectfully challenged whether this approach could scale as the company grew. By the time the crowd thinned out, Lucas was emotionally exhausted but oddly energized. He'd said what needed saying. People had listened. Maybe it would make a difference. Claire caught him as he was gathering his things. You were perfect, honest, vulnerable, clear about why this matters. That's exactly what people needed to hear. I almost cried in front of 200 people. You almost cried while talking about something that profoundly affected your life. That's called being human. She smiled. Come on, I'm buying you a drink. You've earned it. They ended up at a quiet bar 3 blocks from the office, settling into a booth near the back with whiskey for Claire and bourbon for Lucas. The post-town hall adrenaline was wearing off, leaving Lucas feeling wrung out and contemplative. Do you think it will actually change anything? He asked after his first sip. Or did we just give an inspiring speech that people will forget about next week when deadlines get tight? Claire considered the question seriously. I think we gave people permission to believe their well-being matters. Whether they act on that permission depends on a lot of factors we can't control, but we created space for a different conversation about work. That's not nothing. It's not everything either. No, it's not. We'll have to keep fighting these battles. There will be more projects like Morrison Chen, more pressure to compromise, more skeptics who think we're being naive. Claire swirled her whiskey thoughtfully. But now we have proof that standing firm is possible, that people will support you if you're brave enough to lead with integrity. Lucas thought about the young engineer asking how to know this was real, about Priya standing up to defend boundaries, about Marcus grudgingly acknowledging the financial benefits of retention. You know what Maya asked me this morning? She wanted to know if I was doing something scary today. What did you tell her? That I had to remind people why it's important to be kind to the people you work with. She said that wasn't scary. That was just being nice. Lucas smiled. She's right, in a way. We shouldn't have to fight so hard for basic human decency in the workplace. It should just be normal. But it's not normal. Not yet. Claire met his eyes. That's why what you did today mattered. You showed people what normal could look like. You gave them a vision of leadership that protects instead of exploits. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who'd found themselves on the same side of an unlikely battle, bound together by shared loss and shared determination to build something better. Can I ask you something personal? Claire said finally. Of course. When you stood in front of the board and risked your job, what were you thinking? Were you terrified? Certain you were making the right choice? Some combination? Lucas considered the question. I was terrified, absolutely. I have a 4-year-old depending on me, a mortgage, all the normal adult responsibilities that make unemployment scary. But underneath the terror was something clearer. I couldn't be the person who approved another dangerous shift, couldn't ask my team to sacrifice their health for my job security, couldn't teach Maya that principles matter only when they're convenient. You chose integrity over security. I chose to live with myself. Security doesn't mean much if you hate who you've become to maintain it. Claire raised her glass. To choosing integrity, even when it's terrifying. Lucas clinked his glass against hers. To building something better, even when people think we're naive. They finished their drinks talking about lighter things, Maya's latest elaborate playground games, Claire's ongoing attempts to convince her elderly cat to accept new furniture, the absurdity of corporate jargon. By the time Lucas headed home, the weight he'd been carrying all day had lifted considerably. Maya was full of questions when he picked her up from after-school care. Did you do the scary thing, Daddy? I did. I talked in front of a lot of people about why it's important to be kind. Were they mean about it? No, sweetheart. They were actually really nice. They agreed that being kind is important. Good, because being mean is limiting people's potential. Lucas laughed, pulling her into a hug. You're absolutely right. Being mean definitely limits potential. That evening followed their normal Friday routine. Pizza for dinner, extra stories before bed, Maya's insistence on wearing her princess crown while brushing her teeth. Normal, comfortable, the kind of ordinary moments that mattered more than any professional achievement. After Maya was asleep, Lucas sat on his small balcony with a beer, watching the city lights and thinking about the day. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, thank you notes, questions about implementing similar approaches, appreciation for his honesty. He responded to a few, bookmarked others for Monday, and let himself just be still. 4 years ago, he'd stood in a hospital waiting room believing his career was over, his integrity shattered, his capacity for leadership destroyed. Now he was being celebrated as an example of principled management, asked to mentor others, recognized for the very thing he'd once thought made him unfit to lead. The guilt hadn't disappeared entirely. Lucas suspected it never would. But it had transformed from a crushing weight into something more like a compass, a constant reminder of why boundaries mattered, why protecting people was worth professional risk, why some failures could become foundations for better decisions. His phone rang, Claire's name on the screen. "Sorry to bother you on Friday night," she said, "but I just got off of the phone with Patricia Henderson from the board. She wanted me to know that her daughter came home from the town hall genuinely excited about her job for the first time in months. Said it gave her hope that this company was different." "That's good to hear." Patricia also said something else. She's proposing that we create a formal mentorship program pairing experienced managers with newer ones, specifically focused on boundary setting and sustainable team management. She wants you to help design it. Lucas felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Me?" "You. Because you've proven it works. Because you've shown that protecting people doesn't mean sacrificing excellence. Because people trust you." Claire paused. "I know you're already stretched thin between your team and being a single parent, but if you're willing, I think this could multiply the impact of what you're doing. Turn one principled manager into dozens." Lucas thought about the junior manager who'd thanked him for modeling boundary setting, about the young engineer asking how to know this was real, about all the people who wanted to lead differently but didn't know how. "I'm willing," he said. "I'll make time. This is too important not to." "Thank you. We'll talk details Monday. But Lucas, I'm proud of you. Evan would be proud of you too." After they hung up, Lucas sat with those words for a long time. Evan would be proud. Not of perfection, not of never making mistakes, but of learning from failure and choosing to protect others because of it. The weekend passed in a pleasant blur of playground visits, grocery shopping, Maya's elaborate games involving mermaids and astronauts and the ever-important octopus president. Lucas tried not to check his work email, tried to be fully present with his daughter, tried to model the kind of work-life boundaries he advocated for professionally. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and a sense of possibility. Lucas dropped Maya at preschool, endured her lecture about the importance of respecting everyone's dignity, and promised to come home on time for dinner. The office buzzed with residual energy from Friday's town hall. People stopped Lucas in hallways to continue conversations, to share their own stories about burnout and recovery, to ask for advice about specific situations. His calendar filled with one-on-one meetings, mentorship requests, invitations to speak at team events. At 10 o'clock, Claire called a small meeting with Lucas, Patricia Henderson, and the head of HR to discuss the mentorship program. They spent 2 hours outlining objectives, identifying potential mentors and mentees, creating curriculum around sustainable management practices. "We're calling it the Evan Bennett Leadership Initiative," Patricia explained, "focused on developing managers who lead with integrity and protect their teams. Lucas, we'd like you to be the lead mentor, but you'll have support staff to handle logistics and coordination. I appreciate that. I want to make sure I can still be present for my daughter." "That's exactly the kind of priority we want mentors to model," Patricia said warmly. "Leaders who understand that having a life outside work makes them better at their jobs, not worse." Over the following weeks, the initiative took shape. Lucas found himself teaching other managers techniques he'd developed through trial and error, how to push back on unrealistic timelines, how to have difficult conversations with clients, how to create team cultures where boundaries were respected instead of resented. He also learned from the managers he mentored. A woman from the design team showed him how she'd built flexibility into project estimates to account for creative processes that couldn't be rushed. An engineer-turned-manager shared his system for rotating on-call duties, so no one person carried constant stress. The Morrison Chen project progressed smoothly on its 12-week timeline. The client was impressed with the quality of deliverables and the responsiveness of the team. They ended up extending the contract for Phase 2 work, specifically requesting Lucas's team because of their professionalism and reliability. Marcus Chen, the skeptical CFO, grudgingly admitted in a leadership meeting that the sustainable approach was proving more profitable than the old burnout model. Lower turnover costs, higher client satisfaction, fewer quality issues requiring expensive fixes. It all added up to better margins despite occasionally turning down aggressive timelines. 6 weeks after the town hall, Lucas was leaving the office at 5:30 on a Thursday when he ran into Claire in the parking garage. She looked tired but satisfied, carrying her laptop bag and a stack of documents. "Heading home at a reasonable hour?" she asked. "Maya has a school performance tonight. She's playing a tree in the forest play. Apparently it's a very important tree." Claire laughed. "Of course it is. Give her my congratulations on the prestigious role." "I will. How are you doing? You look exhausted." "Long week, but good. The board meeting yesterday went well. They're finally starting to trust that our approach isn't going to tank the company." She paused, seeming to consider whether to say something more. "Actually, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever feel guilty about being happy? About moving forward with your life when Evan can't?" The question caught Lucas off guard with its raw honesty. He set down his bag, giving Claire his full attention. "All the time, especially in good moments. When Maya does something hilarious, or I accomplish something at work, or I'm just eating a good meal, there's always this voice asking if I deserve to enjoy this when Evan is gone." "How do you handle it?" "I remind myself that Evan wouldn't want me stuck in permanent grief. That the best way to honor him is to protect others and live fully. It doesn't make the guilt go away completely, but it makes it bearable." Lucas studied Claire's face. "Where's this coming from?" She looked away, her professional composure slipping. "I've been seeing someone. Dating. It's new and complicated and probably too soon, but he makes me laugh and I feel lighter when we're together. And then I feel terrible for feeling lighter because how can I be happy when my brother is dead?" "Who is he?" "David Morrison's son, the board member whose son was Evan's roommate. We met at a company event and started talking about grief and loss and—" Claire shrugged helplessly. "It just happened." Lucas felt a smile tugging at his lips. "Evan would absolutely approve of you dating his former roommate. He'd probably make terrible jokes about keeping it in the family." "He really would," Claire laughed, wiping her eyes. "But it feels wrong somehow, like I'm betraying his memory by moving forward." "You're not betraying anything. You're choosing to live. There's a difference." Lucas picked up his bag again. "Claire, we've both spent years punishing ourselves for surviving. Maybe it's time to accept that we're allowed to be happy. That building better systems and protecting others is enough. That we don't have to destroy ourselves to prove we cared about Evan." "Is that what you tell yourself?" "It's what I'm learning to tell myself. Some days I believe it more than others, but I'm trying." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think you deserve happiness. You've worked incredibly hard to build something meaningful here. You're allowed to enjoy your life outside of that work." Claire nodded, visibly emotional. "Thank you. I needed to hear that from someone who understands." "Anytime. Now go home and call your boyfriend. I have a very important tree performance to attend." They parted with mutual understanding, two people learning to carry loss without being crushed by it, to honor the past while embracing the present. The school performance was exactly as chaotic and adorable as Lucas expected. Maya stood perfectly still as a tree for approximately 30 seconds before deciding to add interpretive dance to her role, much to the director's dismay and the audience's delight. Lucas applauded loudly, took approximately 300 photos, and felt grateful to be present for these small, perfect moments. That night, after Maya was asleep, Lucas pulled out his phone and opened the photo of Evan's letter that Claire had sent him months ago. He read it again, focusing on the parts about protection and respect, and the kind of leader Evan had believed Lucas to be. "I think I'm getting there," Lucas whispered to the photo, to the memory, to the brilliant young man who'd seen potential in him that Lucas was only now beginning to believe was real. "I think I'm becoming the person you already thought I was." He set the phone aside and pulled out a notebook, jotting down ideas for the next mentorship session. Ways to help other managers understand that protecting people wasn't weakness, but the highest form of leadership. Techniques for setting boundaries without guilt. Stories about choosing integrity over convenience. 3 months after the town hall, on a cold December afternoon, the company held its annual holiday party. Lucas brought Maya, who immediately appointed herself social director and began organizing the other employees' children into an elaborate game involving reindeer and spaceships. Claire found Lucas near the refreshment table, watching Maya orchestrate her complex scenario with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to lead. "She's going to run the world someday," Claire observed. "That's what everyone keeps telling me. I'm already apologizing to the world in advance." Don't. We need more leaders like her, confident, creative, unafraid to challenge limitations. Claire smiled. "She learned that from watching you, you know. She learned it from being herself. I just try not to mess it up too badly." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the party swirl around them. People were laughing, relaxed, enjoying themselves in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. The atmosphere was markedly different from corporate events Lucas remembered from years past, when people showed up out of obligation and left as quickly as possible. "I have something for you," Claire said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Don't open it now. Wait until you're home." Lucas took the envelope, feeling something solid inside. "What is it?" "A thank you for everything you've done this year, for standing up to the board, for mentoring other managers, for being living proof that our approach works. Open it later." She touched his arm briefly. "I mean it, Lucas. You've made a real difference here." After the party, after getting Maya home and into bed despite her protests that the reindeer spaceship mission wasn't finished, Lucas opened the envelope. Inside was a small plaque made of polished wood. Engraved on a brass plate were the words, "Evan Bennett, Leadership Award for Integrity and Compassion, Inaugural Recipient, Lucas Reed." Underneath, a note in Claire's handwriting. The board voted unanimously to create this annual award recognizing managers who lead with integrity, protect their teams, and embody the values Evan believed in. You're the first recipient because you've shown us what those values look like in practice. Thank you for turning loss into purpose, for transforming guilt into protection, for proving that being a good person and being a good leader aren't contradictory goals. Evan would be so proud of who you've become. I know I am. Lucas sat at his kitchen table with the plaque in his hands, reading the inscription over and over, and finally allowed himself to believe that maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a better future from its broken pieces. The year ended with quiet satisfaction. Lucas's team delivered the Morrison Chen project ahead of schedule with exceptional quality metrics. The mentorship program enrolled 20 managers and had a waiting list for the next cohort. Employee satisfaction scores reached record highs. Turnover continued dropping. On New Year's Eve, Lucas stood on his balcony after Maya was asleep, watching fireworks bloom across the city sky, and thought about how far he'd come since that Friday night in an empty hallway when Claire had asked if he was still upset with her. He wasn't upset, wasn't crushed by guilt, wasn't running from his past. He was building a life that honored loss by protecting the living, raising a daughter who believed in dignity and respect, leading a team that trusted him, mentoring others who wanted to lead with integrity, creating meaning from tragedy. Evan was still gone. That fundamental truth remained unchanged, but maybe Lucas had finally learned what Evan had tried to tell him in that letter, that protecting people from their own ambition, that fighting for boundaries, that treating humans as more valuable than deliverables wasn't just good management. It was the only kind of leadership worth doing. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Happy New Year. Thank you for being brave when it mattered. Here's to building something even better next year." Lucas typed back, "Shim, Happy New Year. Thank you for building a company where being brave is possible. Here's to all of us moving forward together." He sent the message, pocketed his phone, and watched the last of the fireworks fade into smoke and stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to either enforce boundaries or let them slip, new tests of whether he really believed the principles he claimed to champion. But tonight, he was content. Content with the choices he'd made, the person he was becoming, the life he was building for himself and Maya. Content with the knowledge that guilt could transform into purpose, that loss could become protection, that broken people could heal enough to help others. Content, finally, to honor Evan's memory, not by punishing himself, but by being the leader Evan had always believed he could be. The fireworks ended. The city quieted. Lucas went inside to his daughter, his home, his hard-won peace, and for the first time in 4 years, he slept without the weight of unearned guilt crushing his chest, secure in the knowledge that he'd chosen integrity over convenience, people over profit, healing over self-destruction. He'd chosen to live again, to protect others, to build something worthy of the loss that had nearly destroyed him. That was enough. That was everything. That was the truest kind of redemption possible.